Now, normally, Shakespeare likes to intersperse his serious moments with his lighthearted ones, but Hamlet's a pretty dark play. The playwright tries to set more of a balance here by introducing two gravediggers, a comedic tag team that's supposed to ease us into this last act. But for a comedic discussion, this topic is pretty serious. That is, can Ophelia actually enter heaven if she committed suicide? Those of you with religious backgrounds may have been taught that suicide is what qualifies as a mortal sin. In other words, go directly to hell. Yet the gravedigger here makes a good point, in that technically we can't really say it's suicide if the water was the thing that actually came up to her rather than her going into it, right? We know that these guys are meant to be idiots because they mispronounce names like Crowner when they mean to say coroner. They consistently mix up names and words and drop puns, like having an argument here about Adam being a noble or a gentleman and proving it because he was the first that ever bore arms. Think of the coat of arms like for a noble family's crest as opposed to, being the first human being to actually have arms, since we're talking about Adam from Adam and Eve fame here. Another joke here that makes puns about the things that people build that last the longest. From a cinematic perspective, the camera shifts back here to reveal Hamlet and Horatio overhearing this discussion. Hamlet, of all people, has a kind of Karen-like moment where he complains about the gravediggers' insensitivity towards the bodies strewn around them. Now, I should mention that the staging of this cemetery is not how we may picture it today, with neatly lined up gravestones and markings indicating where everyone's buried. While this is a graveyard for noble families, it appears to be one where the bodies get buried, eventually turn into bone, and then get pushed aside when another body needs to be buried, so that all the bones inevitably get mixed up with each other. I don't know if this is historical accuracy, or if Shakespeare just set this up to set up the visual image that dominates the perception of this play. Anyway, Horatio points out that the gravediggers are used to dealing with bodies, so hence the lack of sensitivity. The gravedigger is singing, shoveling, and probably sending bones flying in the background over his shoulder. While this happens, Hamlet speculates as to the identity of the bones' original owners. Option 1 here might have been a politician. Option 2 could have been a butt-kissing courtier like Rosencrantz or Guildenstern. Option 3 could have been a noble lady, chapless meaning lacking a jawbone. The idea comes to Hamlet that whether one is noble-born or not doesn't affect where you end up after death anyway. We all come to the same place. While Hamlet ponders this question, he approaches the gravedigger to start asking about the grave being dug. Here, the crazy speaking patterns and literal answers role, the one that's traditionally given to Hamlet, has been reversed. These two have a minor argument as to who actually owns the grave, where Hamlet wants to know whom the grave is being dug for, while the gravedigger points out that he dug the grave, so he is its owner. Hamlet realizes he's got to speak really literally or he will be misunderstood, and Polonius is probably laughing in his grave right now. We learn a tidbit here that Hamlet was born on the same day that the gravedigger became the chief sexton of the graveyard, which also happens to be the same day that King Hamlet, the dad, killed King Fortinbras of Norway. Hamlet wants to know what the gravedigger has heard about Prince Hamlet being sent to England. Shakespeare takes this opportunity to make fun of English folk, as they are all insane like Hamlet is. This probably got a lot of laughs from the local crowds. Also, interesting tidbit, apparently even though Hamlet was a college student and acted in a lot of less than mature ways, he's actually a 30-year-old man. Kind of like this man-child here. I don't have information as to how old Ophelia was, and I don't think she's as young as Juliet was in Romeo and Juliet. But she's probably pretty young too, not nearly the age of 30, because at this point she would probably have been considered an old maid. Hamlet picks up a skull here. It's the source of a lot of this imagery associated with the play. You may have seen Hamlet played by Mel Gibson, David Tennant, Laurence Olivier. You get the idea. A lot of them have held skulls in their hands. Turns out that this skull belongs to Yorick, the late court jester, who apparently poured wine on the gravedigger once. Hamlet picks up the skull and reminisces about all the good times he had when he was a little boy, the times he kissed his lips, the jokes that he heard. Another reference here by Hamlet to ladies and their thick paints of makeup covering their faces, and he points out that no amount of makeup can prevent one from eventually becoming a skull, really concerned with the masks that women wear in general. Going back to the bigger question, Hamlet asks Horatio whether or not Alexander the Great also ended up in skull form like this as well. And for people who come from religious backgrounds or have had the opportunity to attend a funeral, the phrasing here brings to mind the phrase ashes to ashes, dust to dust that priests may make, referring to having been created from dust, at least Adam having been, and that we all eventually return to the same dust from whence we came. It's a circle of life story. It's almost like that story about a lion prince whose dad was murdered so that the young prince could come and take revenge upon the uncle. It was somehow inspired by another story. Speaking of which, this play itself probably borrowed from, I believe, an Italian play's plot, if I recall. Hamlet notices the funeral procession arriving, and he judges that from the lack of really ceremony, the person whose the funeral is for must have committed suicide, but he doesn't know for whom this funeral is. Hamlet also speaks highly of Laertes upon seeing him, because the characters have not yet met in the play. Laertes is in the midst of arguing with the priest, who tells the grieving young man that even this kind of poorly decorated or performed funeral is more than what his sister deserved. By all rights, according to the priest's belief, she should be put into an unmarked grave or some similarly lack of honored burial ground due to the fact that she committed suicide and is therefore bound for hell. Laertes has mean things to say about that. Shout out to another famous line often used in pop culture today, sweets to the sweet. Laertes, continuing to demonstrate that he is motivated by the one note of passion, leaps into Ophelia's grave to show the depths of his grief. Hamlet now realizes, oh shoot, my girlfriend's dead. I'm gonna jump out here. But his appearance makes Laertes erupt in rage. Some plays stage this battle actually within the grave itself, like Hamlet jumps into the hole in the ground. Others, like the stage directions indicate, have Laertes coming up outside of it to fight him. No matter which way you stage it, we've got these two young men arguing and fighting over, around, or somewhere near Ophelia's body. Typical funeral behavior. Hamlet worsens the situation by saying he loved Ophelia more than 40,000 brothers could. He challenges Laertes to prove how much he would be willing to do in order to show his love. Gertrude, whether she's trying to work in concert with her son or simply trying to prevent him from getting killed by an enthusiastic guard, cries out that Hamlet is insane. Hamlet takes the cue, tries to backtrack and tell Laertes that he's always loved him, he's always respected him. Claudius talks to Laertes to remind him, oh no, we're not going to fall for that. We've got a plan, really like 3 plans.